Hey, welcome everyone. I'm Mike Gilliland, editor of Foresight, and welcome to I believe, the last practitioner track session of the conference. So thanks for sticking around. This morning, I want to introduce Eric Wilson. He's Director of Thought Leadership at the Institute of Business Forecasting. Eric is a globally recognized author, speaker, and advisor with over 25 years of experience in forecasting, analytics, S&OP, and IBP. At the IBF, he leads research and content focused on advancing planning capabilities and on best practices. Eric is author of multiple books, including the latest, Amazon best-selling, Beyond Borders, Cultural Complexity, and Global Business, which you early arrivers all got a copy of. So thank you, Eric, for that. Eric's work bridges culture, strategy, and execution, and he's known for making complex ideas practical and impactful. Welcome, Eric. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. All righty. Make sure I can, there we go. So, welcome. Thank you very much. I'm excited about being here. I've been meaning to come to an ISF conference now for years. Finally, Mike drugged me here and talked me into doing this, and I'm excited to be part of this conference. This is really an opportunity where research and academia meets practice and real-life application. Now, that said, there is a bit of a gap there still. I've attended some great sessions. There is a little bit of a gap there, and I'm going to discuss a little bit of that gap today, of why we are seeing that, and maybe how both sides can really start looking at things a little bit differently. That is what my objective is. My name is Eric Wilson, Director of Thought Leadership for Institute of Business Forecasting. So I came to that role after a couple decades of practitioner experience. I have scars to prove it if you want to see them. I've been in transformational roles, been in seats where I've done the actual work and planning itself. Now I work with the IBF, I write books, I do a lot of organizations, I audit their processes, I do a lot of training around the world. So my perspective now is not just what I did for a couple decades, but the hundreds of organizations I've worked now with the IBF. If you do want to find me on LinkedIn, please, I'll follow you back. You don't have to put, by the way, I was at the ISF conference, and please, just send me, I'm going to accept the invite. FYI, there's a Instagram there as well. I'm a big foodie. So I'm one of those, if you want to see what I eat, when me and Sven go to different conferences, you want to see what we eat? Yeah, I post. I'm one of those as well, so you can follow me there as well. I do have a podcast as well, IBF On Demand, if anybody wants to see. I interview a lot of thought leaders on that podcast. One quick thing before I get past this one, Institute of Business Forecasting. If you're not familiar with it, it's a lot like the organization you're involved with now, more practitioner-based. It's about 55,000 members worldwide, globally recognized for a certification program in fundamentals of demand planning, business forecasting, and it's really a professional organization about fostering the growth of those fields. That's what it's about. So there's a large body of knowledge there. There is some research there. It's less technical research, more of the practitioner-based research. And with that, I'm going to bring a little bit of that to you. A little bit of that research and a little bit of the research I did with my own as far as this book. There's two things we want to kind of accomplish today. One, I want to start getting you to think beyond your research paper into what reality may look like. And for the practitioners here as well, because this is a practitioner track, and we're really bringing those two worlds together. And for the practitioners here today, less for you, but other organizations, what you need to start thinking about and how you need to expand your horizons. And I'm going to start, I said two things. One, really the easy answers of why some of the most technically sound forecasts still seem to fail. But then the second part, I want to give you some little less obvious reasons why some of those may fail as well inside organizations. So with that, I have seen sound forecast, 20% improvement in forecast, actually show negative results to a balance sheet, negative results to a P&L. Performance actually got worse as the forecast got better. We see it. Real life example. over a couple-year process of implementing new algorithms, new technology, new process, we've seen a significant improvement on forecast, significant improvement on forecast. And with that, you can say, hey, yeah, we saw service improve as well. Revenue, top-line revenue improve. But at what cost? Sales disengaged. We saw ballooning cost during those same time period. Inventory actually increased, and so inventory turns actually got worse as well. The bottom line, EBIT, actually saw degradation. We saw 29% worse EBITDA with a 14-point improvement on forecast. A real-life example, a CPG example. This is in U.S., but this is a real-life example of what we see. This is one case. We see this in other organizations as well. So then the question would be, why do we see good forecast, fail inside of organization? I said I'm going to address this in two ways. One, kind of the obvious reason. Localized optimization. We're focusing on forecast. We're focusing on precision. And with that localized optimization, we sometimes miss a much bigger picture. The system that it's operating in. The business process that it's integrating into. And we see that improving part of that process or localized part of that process doesn't always improve the entire process. So we start going through the whys. Why? And the common answer you'd probably get with most people in here is, obviously, it's poor data. We spend 2/3 of our time wrangling messy data and focusing on the bad data issues inside organizations. They're coming to us with 1-2 years of history, and they're wanting to put these large complex models to it with seasonality with not enough data. We see them wrong model. I have the good model. I have the model that can solve any problem. They just don't have the right model yet. Technology. They're not ready with the right technology, or they don't have the maturity level. All those are possible answers for why we're not seeing technically sound forecast improving the bottom line. But I'd say there's other reasons as well. And number one is the wrong objectives. We're seeing you chase precision instead of a business problem. We're seeing the wrong incentives, that you're incentivizing the wrong behavior, either with your model or the organization and functions inside the organizations. We're seeing misalignment or the forecast not even being utilized. And we're seeing the people side of things as well. Trust in the model, trust in the process, which ultimately comes down to a people and cultural issue as well. These are what we truly see as some of the underlying issues of why good forecasts seem to be failing inside of organizations. The problem that most people are solving in here is some input, a transformation of that input into an output. And they're focusing on that output. They're really focusing on that forecast. They're focusing on precision of a transformation of an input into an output. That is what you're doing. The other side of the equation, though, is someone's making a decision inside your organization. They're focused on what decision needs to be made right now to improve the business. And then they're taking actions to those decisions, operational, tactical operations that are occurring because of those decisions. And those are creating a different type of outcome. It's obvious to see part of the problem is the disconnect between these two. Most of the research, most of the presentations that I've heard over the past few days, great presentations. There's some wonderful things that's being created and done. But most of everything we focus on is the model side of the equation. Precision is asking, how do we improve the forecast? Most of the research I'm hearing, most of the research I read is, how do we improve a forecast? What feature engineering? What new model? What can we do to improve a forecast? Guess what business is asking? Business is asking, how do we improve the business? That is what they're asking. Unfortunately, I said, this is a great forum. I'm proud to be actually part of this forum now and be able to speak. And I said I've heard some great presentations, and the IIF is a great forum to be able to cultivate new thinking, innovative ideas. And we should celebrate that we have this opportunity to come together and celebrate some of the things we do and applaud other practitioners and other researchers to say, yeah, you're doing something out of the box. It's amazing what you're doing. And have that celebration of our field. But honestly, most of the business community, they're not either paying attention or worse yet, a lot of them don't care. They're like, what's it mean to us? What's it mean to the bottom line? What's it mean to my EBIT? What's that mean? And that is what they're focusing on. We see a disconnect right now between the focus on the model and precision and the business decisions that are being made. That is where part of the disconnect. And this is part of the reason why we see a technically sound forecast fall or falter when it comes to the decisions it's trying to enable. This brings us to that precision paradox. The continuous search for precision really blinds us to the larger constraints and the larger problem that may exist. I said that most companies are less concerned about what is going on right here. They should be, absolutely. And I'm going to have a few slides for them to say, hey, this is what you need to start paying attention to. But at the same time, they're less concerned what's happening here. Because what we have to understand first is precision does not always equal the decision. There is a difference sometimes between what we are accomplishing as a precision and the decision being made. And the search for a better forecast can actually distract us from the larger organizational goals, the larger objectives of an organization. Forecast accuracy is a measure of percentages. Business performance is really defined by the system and balance sheet and P&L that really drives the health of the organization. And the biggest gains rarely come from a percentage point of accuracy. I've seen a lot more gains looking at the uncertainty that comes from supply chain in businesses, lead time variability, from processes such as sales and operations planning, integrated business planning, of being able to integrate different functions towards a common goal for coordinated decision making. And technically better forecasts cannot overcome poor initiatives when you have disconnected functions. This is the problem. I said this is the obvious problem that we're facing. So with that, this goes into what are we focusing on? What are we optimizing? What are we really measuring? And we look at when we measure it becomes that target, it ceases really to become a good measurement sometimes. Forecast accuracy can absolutely improve our forecast. But as I said, it's not a proxy. It's a proxy only for that forecast. It's not a proxy for good business. Even when you start looking at your models itself, when you start looking at precision as your proxy for your model, it will eventually exploit its own model to be able to improve what you give it as the proxy, rather than achieving a true objective. And a true objective, I said once again, we need to align to what the business objectives are. If the business objective is service at any cost, well, we need to align to that objective. If the objective is protect my cash, we need to align to those objectives. and we have to make sure that our model proxies aligning to the business objectives that we have. That is part of the disconnect we have. So what is the missing piece? Well, the missing piece, obviously, is connecting them. But I'm going to pick on both sides because we are not connecting the precision and the models and the forecast to the outcomes, the decisions, the business objectives. But at the same time, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we're not connecting good business practices to data, to analytics, to forecast as well. It really needs to work both directions for an organization to find true benefit. So picking on the research or the precision part first, because that's where I've gone, is we need to start with the end in mind. Too many times, I've even heard it at this conference, and you definitely hear it more broadly outside of these four walls, is a lot of times we are building models to try to find a problem. We'll have a solution to try to find a problem, instead of starting with the problem and then trying to develop a solution for that problem. We're going backwards. We need to look at the end. Start with the end in mind. Define exactly what your business objectives are. What is the business outcome before you start building the problem? If you look at, any project, any process typically has 5 steps. And the first step in any process is to ask the why. We need to pause and ask the why. Who is my internal customer that's using this? What decision are they making? What do they need that inputs to make a better decision? How much uncertainty can they absorb and what they're looking to be able to have? Those are some of the questions we need to define up front. And the better we define that, the better then it's going to lead to the process that's going to determine our inputs, determine our models, determine the outputs, determining how we're going to measure. All those things come from the first question of why. We need to ask why before we start going down this path of this fantastic model that will solve any problem. You may find out that you've created a model that solves a problem that nobody is asking. That is the problem that we're having. So define the business objective, define the outcome before you start building. Understand which decisions the forecast is influencing. You are driving business decisions. What business decisions are you influencing? What do they need? Measure success by business outcomes, not necessarily accuracy. There was a great presentation a couple days ago by Jonathan. Where he talked about forecast value add, a topic that's been near and dear to me for decades, and Mike as well. And he really started defining putting a dollar sign to forecast value add. And when you start looking at that, forecast cost business money. We need to start thinking about the money it cost us to be wrong, or the money it cost us in resource, time, effort to not really get much incremental improvement towards the decision being made. Part of the disconnect that I have and problem that I've had is a lot of times with research, we can do some great research, and if it doesn't work, we can walk away from it and say, oh, okay, I'm going to try something else. A lot of times in the business world and business environment, we don't always have that luxury. And I've seen companies make forecasting or business mistakes that cost them millions. They don't have the opportunity to say, oh, I'm just going to try something else. No, they've cost the business millions of dollars that they now have to figure out a new solution for. There is real consequences sometimes we have to deal with. So we need to not only measure our precision, but we need to measure the business impact. And not only the business impact of our accuracy or our uncertainty, but our business cost of the process itself. We need to start understanding those things. And then finally, designing analytics around the decision-making requirements. There's where we need to be as well. So I started off saying we see a disconnect. Research, academia, and reality. And it's a big gap. And I didn't realize how big of the gap. I think it's getting bigger over the past few years with AI now driving people to just create things that sometimes are slop. There's a lot of good out there, but let's be honest, we're hearing a lot of hype as well. So with that, I see the gap getting bigger. We need to start narrowing those gaps and start getting back to what business needs and what business is focusing on. Now with that, I'm an equal opportunity offender. So I want to pick on some of the practitioners. Now, I've heard some of the practitioners here some great speeches, and you're doing some great things in hospitality and other types of fields that a lot of companies aren't doing. Let's talk a couple slides on what reality is doing. Because I said, we're not connected to the reality, so what is reality doing? What do we see? I said IBF is 55,000 members worldwide. We do a global survey, over 3,000 responses every year from different companies around the world. It's a pretty significant sample size of what the current state of businesses are today. So what do you think the current state? Do you think they're all on the AI bandwagon, consuming massive amounts of external data and feature engineering? Is that the world that exists right now? No. Right now, we see about 7 or 8%, about 7% actually, are using some type of ML model. And I think Sven had a last presentation, had a very similar number in his study as well. This is what we're seeing. Majority of the companies are not out there doing machine learning. Majority are sitting in their own world, using their own sales history, doing some type of moving average. What's not seen on this slide is 43% of companies still operate in Excel as their primary planning system. Excel. 43%. They're not magically jumping over to AI tomorrow. They have a little bit of a path to get there still. So we see 17% are sitting in qualitative type of inputs into their process. Now, we've been doing this survey for decades, couple decades. Back in the early 2000s, that number was 20%. It went down a whole 2% in 2 decades. There's still a lot of Salesforce buildup, or just judgmental, hey, I think we're going to do this. Or executive overrides saying, I don't care what you say, that's what's going to happen. Or operations saying, yeah, great job, forecaster, but I know better. This is what I see is going to happen, or I think is going to happen. That's still driving organizations. This is reality. External data. 21% of companies are using some type of external data in their forecasting process. Now, that said, in 2020, we did the same survey. That was close to 2/3. It went from 2/3 back down to 21% over the past few years. Because what happened during COVID was people didn't trust that internal data anymore. So they went to some external source to try to figure out what's going on. But the problem is people brought all kinds of descriptive analytics to describe what is happening, and they wasn't prescriptive or predictive and say, this is what's going to happen. And they went back to their comfort zone to those order history or shipment history of what's happening internally, and they went back to their moving averages eventually, and now 21% last year, or a couple years ago, in our survey said, this is what we use. Majority is using some type of internal data. This is the reality. So as I said, the problem isn't just that we are too precision focused. The other part of the problem is companies aren't precision focused enough. They're not willing to think outside of their own 4 walls. Most businesses operate with an inside-out type of mentality. They assume that what happened in the past, which is, you're looking at it naive. I don't care what kind of model you put to it. You're extrapolating what happened into, this is what I hope is going to happen in the future. And I'm going to build that, and I'm going to put it in stock or put it on a shelf and hope someone comes and does exactly like they did before. That's an inside-out mentality. And the majority of companies still live in that inside-out mentality. So there's opportunity there. There's opportunities there with what you are doing, with how we are pushing the field, with new innovations, new ways of looking at features and in-feature engineering. There is opportunity ripe out there for organizations to start thinking outside of their four walls with an outside-in type of mentality. And that's what we need to get to. So, what's missing piece from the company's perspective? From a company's perspective, they need to really start with data, start with forecasting. I made the comment that every business decision is based off of a forward-looking projection. It's based off the lag of what you know now and think's going to happen in the future. Every business decision, think about the logic of that. That's true. Any decision you make, you are coming up with some type of logic, assumption of what's going to happen if I do this or if I don't do this. That's a forecast. Businesses start to realizing that. Now, that can just be that 17% gut feel of an executive or operations, or it could be a structured process that brings in different features, different algorithms, and different inputs, and really looks at data and science and says, here's what potential we have. We can start driving these things with data and analytics. And we really need to define the business process and the uncertainty then that we need to be able to operate in. We need to understand which features will influence the forecast, that outside-in start mentality. We need to connect the forecast accuracy actually to ROI of the organization. What is the true value we are bringing with 1% improvement in forecast? Measure forecast value add. And actually not only just measure the forecast value add, start putting some dollar signs to it. Understand the cost of not only air, but the cost of the process itself. And design analytics around decision-making requirements. That's really what we're talking about, and that's what we need to do. With that, I said there was two parts of this. The first part was kind of the obvious disconnect that I think we all know, intuitively know, but I wanted to put some words to it. That there is a disconnect between what we're going after and what businesses are going after, and how do we connect those two dots from both sides. But I also wanted to provide, from a practitioner perspective, since this is the practitioner track, and I'm dealing with hundreds of companies, a practitioner perspective of reality of some of the other things that we're seeing inside organizations that you may not be aware of. Or you may be aware of, but one of the biggest things is back to that incentive game. The incentive game isn't for research. The incentive game isn't only for forecast, that you're operating off precision and you're missing the bigger picture. Incentives are misaligned inside of many organizations. Where sales is incentivized for one thing, operations is incentivized for something totally different. Forecast may be incentivized for something. Executives may be incentivized on something else. So we see the incentives inside organizations misaligned. When we see that misaligned, if you tell me how someone's incentivized, I can tell you pretty much the behavior that that's going to create. If you incentivize operations for cost cutting, and you provide this forecast that's going to add cost, guess what's going to happen? If you incentivize sales for, this is the big one you typically see in most organizations, you're incentivizing sales for sales makes sense without a connection to inventory, cost, or anything of that sort, guess they may be a little bit biased in their forecasting or inputs into the process. They may generate more bias because they want inventory. They want the sales. Those misalignment of incentives inside organizations causes good forecasts sometimes not to be interpreted or to generate bias in the process. We see this. The other one is simply just a disconnect between functions. There was a great presentation at the AI Edge conference in Scottsdale it was a bakery company that Sven's worked with. It actually talked about a project. We need to do AI. We need to do AI. Go after this project, do AI, forecast, precision, reduction. We want to reduce our error and forecast. And they spent months doing this. And at the end of months of time, thousands and thousands of dollars, they found out that there was no actual connection of that forecast to inventory. What operations was operating off of was an entirely different system and signal. Something as simple as that. Or the other one, we're looking at, we need to reduce inventory. Great initiative. At least they were focused on a business objective. We're going to reduce inventory. And obviously, as we improve forecast, we should be able to reduce our inventory because we have a better perspective of what's going to happen. Well, it finds out that because of minimum order quantities, lead times, and deals they were getting, purchasing, supplier, management was purchasing years worth of inventory sometimes to get a better deal because they were incentivized not only on what is the cost per piece, but also there was a disconnect between how they were focused and how they managed versus the other ones. There was a disconnect, just a flat-out disconnect we're seeing inside organizations between, or a siloed mentality inside organizations. The other one, which is a lot less obvious, that I really started looking at more in detail a few years ago, is AI is great, algorithms are wonderful, processes, we need structure. But at the same time, business is a social process. There are people. Everything I've described up to this point was talking about people, really. About one person's behavior, another person's behavior, how they react to incentives versus how they're going to react versus this incentive, how they think quantitative or qualitative. Everything I talked about so far, a person was behind that. And we forget that aspect when we're looking at designing and implementing a process and a model. Business is a social process, and without trust, you're not going to get good forecast. You're not going to get good as far as change management aspect. You're not going to get adoption without trust as the underlying factor of what you do. And with that, despite all the technology, most failures will come down at some point to trust. I don't trust the forecast, or I don't trust you. Trust impacts alignment, communication, decision-making, accountability. All that has that golden thread of trust weaved through everything that we do. And trust is the hidden variable in forecasting. Back to that AI Edge conference that we had in Scottsdale, it was running a roundtable, and we were talking, and the thing that surprised me was, why isn't AI being adopted? Why is only 3% of companies doing something around AI? What is the mitigating reason for that? And I started hearing trust come out. People don't trust it. Or we're having problems with this. It all came down to trust. Whether the data is shared or not comes down to trust. Whether assumptions are challenged sometimes comes down to trust. Whether teams will collaborate and you're getting good, relevant insights and information into a process comes down to trust. Whether AI is adopted can come down to trust. And whether decisions are accepted or not, whether you're going to use that output, comes down to trust. And what we found through research is trust takes on different meanings. Trust doesn't have a uniform definition like you may think. Some people trust data. I trust the data. Is the information right? Okay, I trust the data. At the same time, others trust the model. I have confidence in the model is what's going to happen. Does the model work? Some people trust the process to get there. Are these the right steps to get this output? Some people will trust the output. Have we proven the results? They're proven output. We've done it before. We have record proven success. I trust the output. But there is a group out there that trust people, trust the collaboration, trust the people aspect of thing as well. And most organizations, when you look at what is really defines trust, is transparency, communication, the collaboration, that trust aspect, and the consensus of access to information. Most only really focus on a couple, one or two of that aspect. Which comes down to, if I really wanted to talk about trust, I'm going to put you in one of two categories. Do you trust the system, or do you trust the people? And you find out when you start talking to people inside organizations, not just demand planning functions, but the people going to be using the forecast, and marketing people, and sales, and operations, and you start talking cross-functionally inside organizations, and you ask them that simple question, do you trust the process, or do you trust the person? You will get different results. So when we think about why forecasts sometimes fail, are we really doing the right things to guarantee success of that? And with that, that was where the book of Beyond Borders really looked at these type of questions. It looked at 9 different dimensions. But I reviewed a lot of current academic type of industry research out there, Aaron Myers and Hofstede. There's a lot of other great research already done in this. I expanded upon that research with 9 critical business dimensions that I've discovered through the research of my prior S&OP book and this, that really define differences inside businesses. And that really goes to the heart of forecasting then as well. And I did then a global survey with over 80 countries that were represented, over 100 interviews as well. It really then helped validate some of those hypotheses, and I put together pretty much a lot for this book. And with that, if you asked, are you more relationship-driven or result-oriented? Do you have flexibility, or are you really structured? You can see a defining curve of really how different cultures approach business process. And with this, this is how they're going to approach your forecasting process as well. This is what they're going to look at. So something in the East and looking at China and other types of cultures are going to really have to understand the person and trust the person, maybe more so than when we go to the West and look at maybe Central Europe. It's going to be really defining the process and structure itself. It seems like a bias, but it exists when you look at a survey of people. And it's not just workflow. If you look at incentives, because we said, if you define how someone's incentivized, I can tell you what's going to motivate them. And you can measure that in as well. And you can look at, say, how are you incentivized? Are you more team-focused? Are you the collective? Or are you more individual and personal-oriented? That trust in the forecast is going to relate then how they really focus on things. That team versus personal. They're really, if I'm part of a communal or am I individual in what I need to accomplish? Those can drive behaviors. These will absolutely drive different types of bias. I'm not saying at any of these slides one's right or wrong. I'm saying they're different. And we need to understand that in our forecasting process, in our forecast, and our business designs. Decisions. We need to be driving business decisions. But it turns out how decisions are made is culturally relevant then as well. Yes, some are absolutely hierarchical, some are egalitarian, but beyond just the hierarchy and egalitarian, we can see in what a decision means. You have definitive versus pliable. If you look at cultures such as the Middle East, Japan, China, a lot of the Eastern cultures, it is really a definitive, or what Aaron Meyer called the big D. Those decisions, you give me this answer, that is the answer. period. If you go over to, say, Northern Europe or the United States, I have some ambiguity in those numbers you're giving me. There's flexibility in those numbers. Those are pliable. Those are suggestions. You give me the number, I know it, here's the objective, but I know I can work within my own guardrails to define what's going to be the right solution to me. So I'm presenting a deterministic, or here's your number, interpretation of that number, of how decisions are made or mean, are going to be different based on who you're presenting it to. One of the other dimensions we looked at was presentation, because I'm presenting information, and it turns out that we don't process that the same way as well. Great example of this was this picture taken out there. I wanted to take a picture with my book, happy to do it, and they framed it with the banner in the back and everything, the people, and it was a picture taken by someone, once again, from more of the Eastern type of regions. It's more of a contextualized type of thinking. What was important was not the book, was I'm going to explain everything by everything that's around. That's how I understand it, is everything that around helps me understand that subject. Now, at the same time, if I went to maybe in the U.S., I'm going to take a picture, it's going to be the book itself or just the profile of the person. The subject is the most important part. Think about that in the way you're presenting anything. If I'm presenting information, some people are I need the context to understand the subject. Other people, I need a defined subject. It shows in the way you take pictures, but it also shows in the way people present information and data or consume information and data. How are you presenting that information? So what we looked at is just a subset of some of those dimensions. We need to start thinking not only in the way we are doing the algorithms and math, but we need to think of the way we are consuming them inside of businesses. So yes, we absolutely need to start with the outcome. We need to integrate the process, execution, and people. Build trust across teams. We need to not only focus on the precision and the process, but we need to focus on the people aspect of things as well. We need to understand both process and people to really drive better results. Ultimately, if you looked at what we had was forecasting, we had better statistics. We've gone from better statistics to predictive analytics and better data and technology. We're now in that third where we have artificial intelligence, more data, better algorithms and process. What I hope we strive for is forecasting 4.0. Forecasting 4.0, where we are now more of a cognitive and driving business value. We're connecting precision to business and business results to precision. And we understand how humans are playing a part of this and understand how organizations and cultures make decisions, better decisions. That's where we need to be. The future, I truly believe, future competitive advantage is not who's going to build the best model. We're going to see possibly this AI hype bubble burst at one point. Doesn't mean AI is going away. There is obviously value there. But we're going to see the hype probably burst at some point. We're going to go into that trough of despair. I think the companies that really succeed are the ones that's really focusing on the fundamentals today, are building out some of the capabilities you have and integrating into business processes and working both sides. And it's the ones who create the most trusted decision, making the environment around those models. Those are the ones ultimately I think is going to succeed. So with that, thank you very much. I hope you got a little bit of something out of this. I do have some opportunity, the book. I don't know if Eric had any extra books available upstairs, but Forecast Pro generously brought some of the copies of my book with him. I didn't want to, I'm from Kentucky, and I didn't want to bring them across border, so he generously brought the books here to be able to give them out. He's been, a long-time supporter of this field and of this organization, and he helped support by able to provide that book to you. So if he has any other books, make sure you see his booth upstairs. There is a research attached from IBF with everything I talked about. It goes more in depth about the research that went into different regional variations and 3 of the different dimensions. I do have a podcast, if anybody's interested in that, and then some extra articles there as well. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric, for that very energetic presentation. I think you would have a successful career as a preacher or televangelist if this forecasting gig doesn't work out for you. Anyway, questions, comments, anything from the audience? Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. The one question I had was regarding the pie chart on internal versus external information. And because I didn't take the survey or see the survey, one of the questions I had was, what does a business consider their internal versus external data? For me, one of the thoughts that I might have is, oh, if we bought it, it's internal data now, even if it came from an external source, versus say they're referencing Fed data where they say, oh, the ownership is external, we just look at that. So is that pie chart bearing verisimilitude to what you might think of as external, internal?
No, it pretty much looked at, behind it we were defining, using my internal sales history, shipment history. It defined certain types of internal versus external, and we included in the external type of econometric type of data or anything they're purchasing that was classified as the external data. So great question. Uh-oh.
Thanks, Eric. Great talk. I'm just thinking, I mean, you reflected on trust and all these issues, and that would mean it's practically impossible in some cultures to ever be successful with analytical forecasting. Or, in other words, how would you turn this around to our advantage? I mean, there's mostly analytical people here at the ISF conferences. How do we sell this? How do we sell it in projects, universities working with companies? How do we sell it if we're an analytical geek working in a company? How can we present this in a way to gain trust, to dismantle all the obstacles you've said?
No, that's a great question, even from you. No, with that, I wasn't presenting a right or wrong with that. I just presented a difference. And what I really discovered was one of the biggest benefits of being able to understand is if you understand there is differences, you can then understand some of your own biases and build empathy for others. And little things you can do then if you start stepping outside of your own logical brain, this is my world, and say, yeah, people do think differently than me. You start adjusting the way you may present things, the way you understand how they're consuming things. That is really the key that I found that just knowledge will start to unlock for you. Understanding your own biases and then building from empathy for others. Kind of a great example of that, it's not really from a logical, but you can really start to see how it would apply to other types of processes in your interactions. There was an executive S&OP forum, sales and operations planning. So it's an executive forum, had good cross-sectional functions and people from different cultures in this meeting. And I was there to audit this process for them. And in the forum, there was 2 people, and let's create some biases. There were 2 people, Italians there, very controversial. They wanted to talk, and they talked. And they talked over top of each other, and they had a great discussion, and it brought up and it really challenged a lot of the thinking that was happening there. At the same time, there was a woman there in marketing that was from Asia and never spoke the entire meeting. After the meeting, part of my auditing was interviewing everyone. I interviewed her, and I was like, you didn't speak during the meeting. Her response to me was, I was waiting for a pause. There was never going to be a pause in that meeting. But culturally, that's you wait, you communicate, they communicate. That is what you need to do. What could have occurred in that meeting, understanding who was at that table. So going back to your question, understanding who your audience is, who you're talking with. Yeah, I have one way I generally do things, but just reflecting and taking that moment, that the think slow type of mentality. Pause. And instead of jumping to the conclusion, or instead of just saying it, pause and think of who am I talking to? How am I communicating? If they would have done that in the room and paused or asked a question, they would have got some valuable information that made the decisions that happened in that forum even better. That is what you need to do.
Thanks for these reflections. I have been thinking in particular about your points about trust and how different people trust different things. So you presented some results of how these dimensions vary culturally, geographically across the world, but there's also a lot of individual variance in who trusts what kind of things. I'm wondering, I'm having an issue with trust with my forecast, and I would benefit from some insight into how different stakeholders, like the nature of their jobs, if there's any correlation with the way in which they process trust. So kind of applying the analysis and survey that you did, but spread out instead of countries by the nature of someone's role. And I was just wondering if you've already thought about that, if you've looked into it, do you have any insights? And in particular, the nature of the role, the higher up the leadership is, the less time they have for you to build trust with them. And since transparency is such a big aspect of building trust, do you have any suggestions for building trust, especially with people like in the C-suite?
Yeah, and one of the funny things is it seems like the higher up you go in organizations, the dumber they get, I mean, including the board. I mean, you really got to start dumbing it down to them. You don't have a lot of time. I always make that joke, but when you're looking at building that trust, typically what I look at is what's in it for them type of mentality. Because people, once again, if you go back to the incentives, you can find out a salesperson's incentivized for something. They don't trust you because you're going to take something away from them. Operation doesn't trust you because you're going to take something away from them. And typically that's what I see the trust breaks down inter-company outside of geographs or anything, geography when it comes functionally, because trust starts breaking down because you're taking something away from them. So you need to understand from a perspective of what's in it for them. What are they going to gain if they do this? And then if you end up on the same side of the table as them, they typically trust you better. A great example of that is if a lot of companies struggle with getting good sales input. Sales doesn't trust the process, they don't trust the numbers, they don't trust it. If you're coming into this and you can explain to them of what they're going to get out of it, better service, better something of that sort. That's the first thing, so they can understand their role and responsibility in the process. Works the same way with executives. They have a role and responsibility in this process, you do too. Helping define those roles and responsibilities. The second thing is going after the same objective together. If you're going after one thing, they're going after another, we need to find that common enemy. Common enemy may be stockouts. Common enemy may be cost. You have a common enemy. And if you both, I said, get on that same side of the table, are fighting that common enemy together, you now can help build that trust. The third thing that I recommend then is finding that feedback loop or measure that common enemy together so you can both celebrate when you're achieving something. If you're looking at forecast, I don't know, early in my career, I learned the mistake of I was all proud of my forecast there, and I go into the executives, and I found out they could care less. But what we worked on together was like on time in full, or even if I have the same objective, we have that as our feedback loop, now we can celebrate the win together. So that's really what I found out. Define the roles and responsibilities, find that common enemy, and then define a feedback loop or a metric that really you can celebrate when you start conquering that enemy. That helps.
Yeah, excellent talk. I think all participants should listen to your presentation. One suggestion in the future, perhaps, is to bring the academics and practitioners in one platform. You are competing with 10 other sessions.
Yes.
So they are doing precision-driven research, but you're talking about decision-driven forecasting research. But there's still a gap. Even at this conference, not every academics know what is exactly decision-driven forecasting research. This is not last practical session. Actually, this afternoon, I will representing academics to see how can we bridge this gap.
Excellent. Looking forward to that.
Time's just about up. Any last questions, comments, or insults we want to hurl to one another?
Bring them on. Here's the insult. We got the insult up here.
Ryan, the insult.
Just a quick question about the judgment. So were the judgment forecasts pure judgment, meaning there was no machine input or no system input or no statistical input? Were they manually overrode something? Was that how you classified it? Or was it just pure gut number?
Yes. It depends is my favorite answer. When you're looking at the judgmental qualitative type forecast, typically what we see underneath those would either be like a Salesforce buildup where sales are all creating their own forecast based, and they may use a seasonal walk or an average, or they may use something, but it's what they think is going to happen in their world. And then you're simply aggregating all those forecasts together. It's a Salesforce type buildup, or it could be a judgmental override where you have some type of statistical foundation or some type of machine learning, and then you're adding relevant inputs of, I think we're going to sell more, or something of that sort, and you're adding those as an override to it. Or it could just be for new products, purely type of expert opinion of, hey, we don't have any history, I think we're going to sell this, or executive saying, I don't care what anybody says, we're going to go with that. All those kind of fall under that category.
Lunchtime. Thank you, Eric.